Thank you very much. And first, I would like to thank you, dear audience, for staying on. I know it was super tempting to do something else, but clearly you're very much interested in listening about the hybrid world and what benefits and what challenges and what opportunities it brings to the business and to the society and to our people. Over the past 6 years, we, as the whole world, have moved from almost no remote working to almost complete remote working during COVID, obviously, to now what we call a new normal, which is the hybrid work. Throughout all these years, we in EY have been gathering data and surveying many organizations and their employees, and also some job seekers, to understand their reactions, to understand their expectations, and to understand how they feel about operating in the new hybrid world working environment. And there's some interesting trends coming out, and we recently have completed this survey among almost 2,000 multinational organizations operating in North America, Asia Pacific, and in EMEIA. So we have quite a diverse sample. And there's some interesting trends and common themes coming out of that, which I would love to share with you today. And the main trends, and again, regardless of the geographical or cultural differences, is that there are different expectations, or there's a gap in expectations of the employees and the employers in terms of the hybrid work arrangements. There's a generational gap. So the younger generations, they see flexibility as non-negotiable. So they really see that the employers have to provide this hybrid work arrangements and opportunities there. And also that although there are some clear benefits both to the employers and the employees, hybrid work brings certain challenges. And I'll talk about that in a second. A couple of data points. So by the end of last year, 90% of the organizations we've surveyed have either implemented or started implementing what they call their return to work policies. And even the title of that had a negative connotation, return to work, so almost mandating people to come back to the office. And obviously, as human behavior tells us, which I'm sure our esteemed professors will tell us, that kind of faced resistance from the employees. The main driver for that was, for the return to office policies, was the expectation of the employers for higher productivity. Because there was a perception, and still is, that working in the office leads to higher productivity. However, many employers reported that they faced challenges with their real estate because during COVID, a lot of organizations, they decided to save on the office space. So what happened when they forced people back into the office, a lot of people decided to come into the office in the middle of the week, and guess what? There was not enough space. So that created the first challenge. So many employers reported that they will allow fully remote work to only some employees. But there's a 14% gap in terms of how many employers said that they would allow that versus how many employees actually willing to be working remotely. So that's another another data that proves the expectation gap that we've uncovered. On average, both employees and employers agreed that 2 or 3 days in the office would be would be a normal practice that they will allow and that they will accept. But the employees tend to, like I said, to come to the office in the middle of the week, so normally Tuesday to Thursday. And again, these are the days of the week that they've reported in the survey. And what it turned into is that most of the employers had to get rid of the assignment of seats. So 70% of the knowledge workers, where it's not a production cycle, where it's not connected to the machinery, where people are basically need a desk and a computer, they eliminated the work assignments. And at the same time, the employees said that the main reason why we want to be in the office is because we want to collaborate, because we want social interactions. So there is another gap that has been created due to this hybrid working. Another point that was flagged by the employees is that they have personal circumstances that they want the employer to factor in. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not, I want a policy that factors in that my commute to the office takes an hour and a half in the rush hour, and I would rather start later and continue the day and leave later, but it will give me the necessary flexibility so I don't get stuck in traffic with everyone else who are trying to get to their offices at the same time. There are a few differences by age, by gender, and also by the role, the job role itself. Gen Zs, like I mentioned, they show the highest interest to hybrid work, and the job seekers, especially in their 20s, they don't understand why they have to be in the office every day. I have a 25-year-old son, and he went into the workforce. His first job was during COVID. So he's changed 3 jobs since then, and he couldn't understand why an organization would request him to come to work. And it's just not my son. He's not the only statistics that I'm referring to. It's the generation, the younger generations, they see it more or less as a prerequisite of their future employment. From the job perspective, managers and leaders, so people in a higher positions, they prefer hybrid over remote work. But what's interesting, the younger generations, they reported that they want to see their managers always in the office. So whenever I'm in the office, I want my boss to be there, because this is how I learn, this is how I see, this is how I get the information, this is how I see what's happening in the company. So there is also a disconnect there. So I will come to the office only twice a week, but whenever I'm there, I want my boss there. And finally, from a gender perspective, more females tend to prefer more flexibility and even fully remote work. I mean, you see the difference in the numbers. And it's understandable, and the main driver for that is that women, as the caregivers, they do have more obligations at home. I know it's biased and maybe a stereotype, but this is what people reported through the survey. So preference is different. Now, I spoke about preferences, but we also studied the actual, we call it talent health, but essentially it's a satisfaction, it's an employee satisfaction with their employer, and whether they would promote an organization that they work at. So in terms of the job satisfaction or talent health, the data showed us that people who do not work remotely at all have the lowest score. So if they're always in the office, they're less satisfied. And on the contrary, those who come in 1 day per week have the highest. So 1 day per week have the highest job satisfaction, and those who do not come to the office at all have mixed. There's a 6-point gender gap, unfortunately, and it's pretty sticky, I would say, because year on year, we've been observing a gender gap in terms of the job satisfaction. Probably not much related to the hybrid world, but this survey, the last survey, was specifically asking questions about the hybrid work arrangements, but there is a gender gap there. And I already mentioned the generational differences, but what's interesting that Gen Zs, they scored the highest in terms of the satisfaction when they do completely remote work. So when they're never in the office, they're the happiest. Unlike the boomers, the baby boomers, the more senior people, they are the happiest when they come into the office 2 days a week. So you already see that. I don't know if you associate with any of these generations yourself, but if you think about it, this is not your preference. This is why you're satisfied with your job if you're in the office twice a week versus completely remote if you're a Gen Z and a young, like my son. Now, in summary, I would say, and I would let my fellow panelists to share their experience. But the main challenges that we've picked up through the data and the insights that we received both from the organizations but also from the employees would probably fall into the 4 categories. The first one is visibility and the proximity bias. And this comes especially to the play when organizations think about allocation of work. It's so much easier to give a task to a person who's physically in the office sitting next to me rather than thinking about, oh, who is on the line, who should I connect with, although that person might be better skilled for the task. It's just the proximity bias. So work allocation, promotions, when it comes to making decisions about whom to promote, proximity bias gets in the way. And there comes also a recognition in terms of the contribution of the people. If I don't see you in the office, I would probably think less of your contribution rather than if you're in my face every day. I'm exaggerating slightly, but to make the points that this is what people reported as the challenges that they're facing. The next one, the gender one, I already mentioned that females have more caregiving duties. And again, this comes with a perception of productivity, higher productivity if people are in the office. So there's a perceived bias, again, if people are less in the office, they're less productive. The cultural challenges, and it comes to the communication challenges, different cultures, and if they're underrepresented cultures in a particular work environment, they tend to be quieter in the virtual meetings, or I'm sure you've all been in the hybrid meetings where the majority sit in the room and there are a few people joining virtually on screens. Guess who gets more attention? Obviously people who sit in the room, who are present in the audience, and not joining virtually. And then the final one, the final challenge, again, I already covered. This is generational differences. Although the younger ones, like I mentioned, they prefer to work remote and or come to the office not for many days during the week. The main challenges, though, are very simplistic. Some of them relate to commute. Some of them relate to the cost of the commute and also cost of working in the office. Because if the offices are located in pretty expensive areas and pretty expensive neighborhoods, for the younger ones with a lower compensation, it becomes pretty expensive. I show up in the office, my boss is not there, I don't get the development, I get to sit in front of my computer with my headphones. What's the point of coming to the office? And finally, there's no space to work. So these were the main challenges mentioned by the younger people. Again, in terms of some of the responses, especially the corporate organizations, the corporates' responses to these challenges, we are now seeing more and more creative policies that are becoming more and more personalized. So the message that people want their personal circumstances and personal preferences to be addressed by the corporate policies has been heard. Visibility is addressed through the skill-based work allocation, so reminding people that you need to think about not an individual who's sitting next to you in the office, but rather who's best placed in terms of the skill set that this person has. Outcome-based performance management, and I'm really curious how my panel members would talk about that. And finally, and I think it was mentioned in the opening plenary, culture of leadership. So many organizations have now started thinking about how to develop leaders who know how to lead in the hybrid world and how to manage hybrid teams and take responsibility for that, fostering that inclusive culture. Thank you.